I would so much have liked to be with you today in person, but as you know, the date of a family baptism has meant that I can't come. And I want just to say how important I think this gathering is, and how important has been the initiative that has made it possible. The group of people who have set this up really have understood what we need to do. What we need to do in the east of England, but what we need to do around the whole of Britain. The truth is that climate change and sustainability are now at the top of our agenda, simply because if they're not, then there will be no agenda. Britain has led the world in setting the standards. We have targets which no other country has, and we have statutory requirements to reach them. The law says that we have to reach net zero by 2050, that we have to do a huge amount by 2030 and even more by 2035. And that's in our law. And the government has simply got to provide the programme to reach what it itself and Parliament has set up. And so what we should be doing in the east of England is making that possible. And I would suggest that the following are the key issues we should be facing. First of all, we're a great agricultural area. We've got to learn to produce the food that we need in a way which doesn't destroy the earth. The fertility of our land has reduced year by year as we have piled more chemicals upon it. We need to move to a kind of regenerative farming which will still produce the food we need, but it will do so at the same time by enhancing the soil and improving our ability to produce. But of course, it's not just a supply side system, it's a demand system too. And we've got to think about how we eat. We do eat too much anyway, and we certainly waste too much food. So if we're going to put that right, then we have to think about eating 20 to 30% less meat, which is what the Climate Change Committee has recommended, and to be eating better meat. If we eat less of it, the cost of the better meat is put into proper perspective, and the better meat is meat which is grown properly on pasture, contributing to the mixed farming that we need if we're going to have the kind of regenerative production that we have to have. So let's look at agriculture and see what we can do with that. Let's look at our food industry and see what needs to be done with that. And let's look at our own selves, particularly in our buying habits and the wastage that we manage to do, which really now amounts to something pretty near 40% of the food that we produce, depending on how much you take into account. But a very high proportion of that is in our own homes. A very high proportion of that is what we have control of. And after agriculture, food, we have to think about travel. Of course, we now have an answer to our travel problems. We have the immediate answer of moving to electric motor cars. The price of those is coming down by comparison. It is significantly cheaper to run them. And the Climate Change Committee has pointed out that by the time we get to the point in which we have almost every car an electric car, the real cost of motoring will have declined very considerably. The government has got to think about what that means about taxation. We have got to move as fast as we can, not just as far as private motoring is concerned, but in delivery vehicles, in the way in which we travel from one place to another, not perhaps by private motor car. In the east of England, we have a lot of small villages, very much removed from others. It's hard for them to rely on public transport. We've got to get better at finding ways in which they can use public transport And modern technology ought to make that much more possible. Ride sharing is not impossible. It becomes even more so, if more possible, if in fact we use modern technology and communicate with each other in a way which helps us to become more community minded. But it's also true, of course, that we have to recognise that the planning system has got to make that easier too. Building houses far away from all the resources is not a sensible policy. We really do need to recognise that the great civilising effect of urban society is that we live close together, close to the amenities, what has been called the quarter of an hour town. Quarter of an hour's walk from the amenities is what we should be aiming at. And that means that we've really got to have planning policies which do that. And adding a few houses on the end of every village because we all should share the pain is not a sensible planning policy. And we really do have to think about how we create new communities in order that they shall be themselves sustainable. I come from a village in which it has, I believe, one of the highest commuter numbers of any village in Suffolk. There's no point in building large numbers of new homes there, all of which will be occupied by people who have to commute long distances in many cases in order to have a job. It's much more sensible to build on brownfield sites in the centre of cities, to build in communities which actually have all the facilities and the work as well, and if not, to create a society which increasingly enables people to work in distance, not necessarily from home, but from nearby home by video link and the like. We have begun to have all the mechanisms that we can use. What we need to have is the will to use it. And moaning on about change is not going to make those changes that we need to make. I'm very pleased to see that the government has taken on James Dyson on his determination to bring everybody back working as they used to work. We're not going to do that. We can't do that if we're going to fight climate change. But some of our great leaders of industry have not yet caught on to the need to fight climate change as a central matter. And if we're going to do that, then we also have to come on to the third area, not just agriculture and transport, but it's housing, building as of itself, not just in terms of building a community where people can get to their work and get their leisure and the rest of it without constant travel. The communities that we're building at the moment consist of houses which are not fit for the future. And local councils have actually got to start being much tougher. And the government's got to give them the powers to do that, not just by bringing forward the future homes standards immediately and insisting on them as part of the planning now, but also, I believe, allowing local authorities to make their own tougher measures in order to make sure that in their areas, houses are built to a standard which is suitable. We must stop building on land which is likely to be flooded. We must stop making it more difficult to deal with floods by building where the floodplain actually is. We really have to be much more sensible about the future. And we also have to build in a way which means that people can recognise that the weather's going to be hotter more often and longer. That means better ventilation. That means homes where people can have and do have the blinds and the open windows which can ensure that the summer is tolerable. We need to learn to live as people in the Mediterranean have learned to live. And we need to do that quickly because the changes are coming very quickly indeed. So there's a great deal to be done. And this conference, I think, will be extremely helpful in leading people to see what together we can do in the east of England in order to ensure that we live a more sustainable life. And I end where I began. The reason that sustainability and fighting climate change is so important is because if we don't, there won't be a future, not just for our children and grandchildren, but for us. The climate is changing very rapidly. We don't have much time to keep that rise below 1.5 degrees. We've already seen what a rise of 1 degree can do in a country which is less terribly affected than many others, the United Kingdom. In countries nearer the equator, that 1 degree has been disastrous, as the floods in Pakistan and in Nigeria, as the appalling weather that has destroyed so many homes throughout the world has shown. Here, it is less malign, but it's very, very tough, and it's going to change very, very quickly. And that means we have to act with an urgency which so far we haven't been able to attest. So together, in the east of England, let's make our part of the world more sustainable. Let's respect the fact that we're going to have less and less water here, and make it possible to live the sort of lives we want for ourselves and our children without costing the earth. Thank you very much.